Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
Today, we thought we'd kick off the conversation with talking about capacity campaigns and endowments. So as always, Andrea, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay. And before I start, I just have to greet Pam Montgomery, whom I haven't talked to in a long time, from Gunnison, Colorado. Hi, Pam. It's so nice to see you here. It's fun. We've been in business with the Capital Campaign Toolkit for a couple of years now. And really all the people we've worked with over the years kind of feel like old friends. So it's fun to see them pop up on this. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We have been thinking a lot at the Capital Campaign Toolkit about capacity building. And, it's interesting to think that really a capital campaign where you raise money for a building is one version of building capacity. Right? That's one way to think about it. That the capacity building is the big umbrella, and under capacity building falls all kinds of other things, like building a capital campaign for a new building, like building an endowment, like raising money for all kinds of other things that increase your capacity, even though they might not be buildings. But we've been particularly interested today in the relationship between endowment, capacity, and capital campaigns, right? It's a big ball of wax, and I think it is often not very well thought through or considered. But let us start out with some ideas. Let me start out with sort of a controversial story, or maybe not controversial, but it's a sad story. I have over the years, every once in a while, encountered an organization that had such a big endowment or quasi-endowment. First, everybody knows the difference between restricted endowment and quasi-endowment.
Probably not.
Those of you who don't, a real endowment,
true endowment.
A true endowment is an endowment that is restricted by and large by donors. And the terms of the gift restrict the use of that gift to something specific. So that's what we call a true endowment. A much bigger component of endowments is what's called a quasi-endowment, or I used to get confused and call them pseudo-endowments, but they're really referred to as quasi-endowments. And those are monies that behave as endowment, namely you invest the money and you only spend a certain percentage of it. You only spend what is earned on that. And there's a lot to say about that. But it is restricted by the board, not restricted by the donor. That means that if worse comes to worse and the board really had to tap into the principal, the board could vote to do that. And you can set up whatever system you want for how much of a board vote it would take to do that. But the idea is that you want something that is an endowed fund, so it pays off long term in the future. But should something awful happen, your board wants the opportunity to be able to spend some of that money. Now, what I have encountered over the years is every once in a while I have encountered an organization that has such a big endowment. Either someone died or something happened and they ended up with a huge amount of money in this quasi-endowment, and it made them totally unwilling to raise money is what really happened. They had such a big pot of money that everybody lost their mojo for fundraising. And honestly, the organization over years fell apart, right? Which was sad. I mean, I've seen that a number of times. So that raises some serious questions about how big an endowment should be, right?
Well, whenever anybody raises that issue with me, Andrea, I always point to Harvard. I say there is not one fundraiser at Harvard that loses 1 minute of sleep worrying that their endowment is too big to go out and ask donors the next day for a big gift. And I actually have had the opportunity to ask one of the lead fundraisers at Harvard, what do they say when somebody says, don't you have a big endowment? And they have some really good answers, as you would imagine that people at Harvard might. And I think that honestly, you can have some of these similar answers. So first, they turn actually the question back on the donor. And they say, it's true. Harvard does have a big endowment. Do you know how much it costs to run Harvard? Right? So, it actually costs more than probably most people. They gave the example, $100 million. No, it costs $1 billion a year to run Harvard, whatever. But you can turn the question around. And the reality is, how much would be enough? And don't you want us to be financially stable and financially responsible into the future? It's irresponsible for nonprofits to live paycheck to paycheck. And I think it's a myth that donors want you to live paycheck to paycheck once they understand what's at stake and the issues that you're working on. So it's just a matter of explaining it, I think. But also, the other response from Harvard, and I think you can use this response too, is, do you want Harvard to stay the number one university in the world, right? And if so, we need to have the biggest endowment in the world. And you can say, don't you want us to continue to care for animals or seniors or feed people or literacy or the environment, whatever your issue is? So, to Andrea's point, don't let an endowment of any size stop you from fundraising. The bigger your endowment is, the more sustainable your organization will be into the future. I don't think any fundraiser worries about that, but perhaps you're worried that your donors are worried about it.
Yeah, I think there's always this question about how big an endowment should be. And it's always, from my experience, it's always difficult for people to have a good answer for that. Well, how big should your endowment be? So years ago, I came up with this idea that every organization should strive to have an endowment of 2 times its annual operating budget. Now, there are a number of interesting things about that answer. And one is that it pins the amount of the endowment to the amount of the annual operating budget, which means that every time your organization grows and your operating budget grows, your endowment should grow. So it keeps some pressure on you to keep raising money for your endowment. The other interesting thing about that particular number is that if you were to take money out of your endowment at 5%, which few people do anymore, but if you did, just for simple math, what that would mean is that every year you began your operating year with 10% of it coming out of your endowment. It's a nice, simple math. Right. And that seems to make remarkable sense to people, actually. Now, I don't care if those are the real numbers or not, but I think it's good to have a goal for how big your endowment should be. And I think it's a good idea to tie it to your annual operating budget rather than just say it should be as big as we can make it.
Right. And all your board members will get on board with the endowment should be twice as big as our operating budget. It's easy math to do. It's simple. It's clear. It's effective. So for those of you that are blessed to have endowments that are bigger than 2 times your operating budget, you can go to the Harvard example. But for the rest of you, probably who aren't quite there yet, it's a good goal.
Right. And then it puts some pressure on you to keep that work going. If you don't have a plan giving program, to start a plan giving program. if you don't have endowment, to start a capacity campaign that would, among other things, increase your endowment. Now, the biggest way that organizations raise money for their endowment, of course, is through planned gifts. Right. And most of those, not all of them, but most of them come in through revocable bequest intentions. And that's fine, right? It just means that you need to keep working on that, working at it. It's slow, rewards slow, steady work.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So I'm curious. We started this conversation, and then we're going to go to questions. So feel free to start populating the Q&A box. So we started the conversation about capacity, right? And of course, building your endowment builds capacity. And Andrea gave a great example that building a building, of course, increases your capacity, but it's not the only thing that increases an organization's capacity. There are lots of ways to help you grow. So I'm curious in the chat, how else do you think about raising capacity in addition to building a new building or renovating a building or growing your endowment? I'd love to see some other examples from you about how you're raising the capacity or how you would like to or could raise capacity at your organization. All right. So yes, people, marketing and development staff, right? Absolutely. Always staff. So we, to me, sometimes staff falls into the category of program, right? Expanding the organization, building other income streams. Okay, good. Yep. Let's see.
Yeah, additional scholarship fund it fits into capacity for sure, right? Yeah. Technology investments, yes. Let's see.
Yeah, going from volunteer staff to paid staff for sure, right? So formalizing, professionalizing,
right?
Marketing.
Request challenges, sure. Let's see, access grant. We're going to increase the goal of increasing the number of ED students served. Yes.
There's some jargon in there that we're probably missing, but that's all right.
That's all right. Right.
Yep. All right. Yeah, but technology, marketing and branding, anything that gets you to grow exponentially or gets you to make a leap in programs and services or the demographic you fund, is probably a good example of capacity. So I just wanted to start off with that. But we do have a fair number of questions that have come in now. Erin, I think we answered your question. How do you define what constitutes a huge endowment? And I think Andrea's explanation of double, anything probably over double your operating budget is I don't know if that's a huge endowment, but it's a big endowment. If it funds at least 10% of your operating budget with the interest. So let's leave it at that. I think hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Susan raises this question of paying off the mortgage and whether that is capacity building. That's a really interesting question and topic. And we can talk about all sides of that. First of all, just to put it out there, it tends to be difficult to raise money to pay off a mortgage, right? Particularly these days when interest rates are so very low. Right, that it costs almost no money to borrow money these days, and conceivably you can invest in something that pays you more than the mortgage that you're paying. So the question is, why would you pay off your mortgage if you can borrow money at a higher rate than you're having to pay in terms of a mortgage? And people who are financially sophisticated will ask questions like that. Why do you want to pay off your mortgage? What people who want to pay off their mortgage point to is that they point to how much money you're paying in your mortgage every year. They say, well, we can just put that money into our program, right? Whatever it is, I don't know, $50,000, $100,000 a year we used, $500,000 we used to pay off our mortgage. We could just invest that in our program. But if you look at various financial instruments whereby you could borrow money for less than you're paying, you're better off not paying off your mortgage. In fact, if you look at an organization like these big universities we're talking about, they live on debt, right? They have these huge endowments, right? And they have huge amounts of debt when they can borrow money for little, because it makes financial sense to do that. So the real answer to that question is not whether you should pay off your mortgage, but whether you have someone involved in your organization who is financially savvy enough to be able to see the opportunities and when you should be paying down your mortgage and when you shouldn't be. It's a more complicated question than just paying off your mortgage so you don't have any debt. Many people would argue that debt is sound, healthy, a good thing for you to have.
Yeah, so I just want to, I'm looking back through the chat here when I asked for examples of things that are capacity building, and clearly there is some confusion that I think we need to clear up. First of all, one of the questions that came in was really on the basics of endowment. So I guess we can, endowment is not your annual fund, and it's not your ongoing programs and services. It's not the money that comes in to pay your ongoing bills, your electric bill and your grocery bill and your staffing bill, right? So two different things. One is capacity building. That is something that gets your organization to the next level. So it's a increased or enhanced technology that enables you to do things faster, smarter, more effectively. It's could be marketing and branding campaign that grows awareness of your organization. So how would you increase the capacity? So it's not just, some people have typed in things, I think, about their regular ongoing programs and services, and that's fine. And those should grow from year to year. Absolutely. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about when we talk about capacity building. We're talking about a leap in growth to the next level. Then there's an endowment. Endowment is a reserve. How do we define endowment? A fund of money that you don't use the principal. You use the interest. You invest the principal, the pool of money, and you only generally use 4 or 5% of the interest per year for your programs and services or whatever you designate it for. But as Andrea was talking about earlier, I wanted to say, when you talked about your quasi-endowment, you say tomato, I say tomato. I've always said quasi-endowment. So I don't know how people say it, but anyways, whatever. Clearly we're talking about the same thing. Your quasi-endowment is a board designated endowment. And that means that the donor hasn't restricted the funds, as Andrea said. So I think hopefully that clarifies some things there. What other question is catching your eye, Andrea? Have you picked out one?
So I want to talk just a little more about this issue of how you can add staff through a capacity campaign, because there is a way to do it. Let's say that you want to expand your services, and in order to do that, you have to add staff, right? You can't expand your services without staff. And you want to do it with a capacity campaign, but you know that capacity campaign, like any campaign, the money is going to come in and be paid out in a pledge, perhaps a 3-year pledge payments. And the question is, what's going to happen at the end of those payments? So you might say, all right, we want to bring on 2 additional staff, and we want to pay for them out of our capacity campaign. But the amount of the money we have to invest in those will go down through 3 to 5 years, during which we're going to increase our fundraising. So you can look at capacity campaigns as a way to sort of springboard or jump your organization ahead more quickly because you get an infusion of money. But you have to be able to answer the question of, all right, how are we going to afford this going forward? One way to afford it going forward is to build your endowment. The other way is to build your annual fund so that you have, and another way is to look at other sources of revenues, right? Whether you're going to increase your fee for services or whatever else it is that brings you money. So you need a bit of a complex financial calculation to figure out, how do we do endowment that brings money in today, lets us expand our services, but over time, as the campaign money runs out, we can project that we're going to be able to continue and to maintain this program going forward. Does that make clear sense?
Yes. And I like the word, I don't know why we haven't used it yet. Miriam's saying infrastructure, right? Yes. So you grow your infrastructure. Thank you, Miriam. That's the word, right? How do you grow your infrastructure that really expands your capacity?
Yes. So Pam Montgomery, who is the knowledgeable person about all things community foundation. If you have community foundation questions, you can address them to Pam Montgomery, who's on this call. She is the head of the Colorado, it's not Gunnison Valley Community Foundation. That's what it is, Gunnison Valley, which is a beautiful long valley in Colorado. She has been in this community foundation business a long time. So she says, when building capacity endowments, when do you move from quiet to public phase? We still have some major donors to talk to face to face. So she, because Pam is in the community foundation business, she has done a campaign or is doing a campaign to increase endowments. That's what they're in the business of, right there. That's what community foundations do. So can you go public and still be asking major donors face to face? That's the question. Pam, here's your answer. Ideally, you want to go public when at a time in your campaign where you are close enough to what it is you want to raise so that you can really build ahead of marketing and steam and excitement, right? You don't want the public phase of your campaign to go on for years. Everyone's going to get tired. You're going to get tired, and you're not going to be able to maintain kind of a head of steam that's going to lead you to a grand celebration. So by all means, use the date at which you want to announce your campaign to motivate your donors to get off their fannies and actually make their contributions. And you want to say, listen, we want to go public in June of 2021, right? Can you make your contribution before then so we actually can finish out this campaign? So that's what I would do if I were you.
And Pam, I don't know if I'm reading into this too literally, but you say we still have some major donors to talk with face to face. Now, so I don't know if that means that you're waiting for the pandemic to end to actually talk to them face to face. If that's the case, I hope not. Look, you and I are face to face right now. Andrea and I are face to face, and we've seen people have unbelievable success soliciting over Zoom and on the telephone this year. And so I would say don't wait.
Right.
But Andrea's, both of her examples also say, let's have a deadline, let's have a goal. And so that will motivate also the staff to say, all right, we've got these, last few donors to talk to. We've got to talk to them. Even if we can't see them face to face, we need to, at least start the conversation on Zoom, start the conversation by phone.
Yeah. And it works perfectly well for most donors. There are occasional donors who really don't like to Zoom, but this pandemic has done us one great favor, which is it's done us many things that are not favors, but it has made many more people comfortable with this way of communicating, and the fundraising world needs to take great advantage of it because it's made things much more efficient and in many cases more effective. Let me answer Kate's question here. I've been staring at it and I do have a suggestion. Kate, I'm sure that if you look online, just do a simple Google search of, endowment payout for nonprofits and see what you find. But the gist of the answer is going to be this. that most organizations have policies for their endowment that says they are going to pay out X percentage, and that percentage will be calculated in a rolling 3-year average. That tends to smooth out, right, the payments. So you're always, your payments are determined not on what your stock account did this quarter or last quarter, but what happened over this quarter when combined with the prior, I don't know how many quarters, the prior 11 quarters, right? My math is not good today. Right. So that's the gist of what many organizations do, this rolling 3-year average, which kind of smooths out the payment. But I'm sure if you go online, you can get piles of resource, particularly from the plan giving folks, probably write a lot of information.
So Susie's asking an interesting question. A few years ago, endowment fundraising was very difficult and had a bad name. Do you think that's changed? And she remembers getting the largest gift ever for an organization, and the board was disappointed that the donor wanted it to go for endowment, unrestricted endowment, which is, I would think lots of board members dream of that, but they clearly wanted it for their annual fund. But the real crux of the question is, first, I think, endowment fundraising is hard. I don't think that has changed. It depends on the way you approach it. I mean, some people think it's easy. Some people think it's hard, right? The real question is, what do donors want to give to? And I think that gets to the second part of your question, right? If you go to a donor and say, the only thing I'm raising money for right now is endowment, and they say, well, I don't want to give to endowment, then it's very hard. If you go to a donor and say, I just want you to give to the annual fund, you're not allowed to give to the endowment, guess what? That's hard too. So what we encourage you to do in any sort of capacity campaign, capital campaign, is to give the donor a variety of choices. And then your fundraising will get much easier. So stop having your board members or even yourselves have this idea of what a donor should give to. If you have a menu of options of things that you want and need, then your fundraising will become easier. And so we encourage organizations that come to us solely with an endowment campaign. We say, yeah, that's going to be hard because a certain percentage, maybe a large percentage of your donors don't want to give to endowment right now. Maybe they'd be delighted to make a bequest intention, but right now they would like to give to something else. And so if you have that menu of choices, a variety of choices, then it's not hard at all. Andrea, I'm sure you want to add something.
Yes, I just want to remind people, it's really easier for us when you have a question, if you type it into the Q&A as opposed to the chat. The chat moves quickly for us for what we can see. So I just saw a question and I can't see it anymore. For example, I have to go hunting for it. Put your questions in the Q&A, and that way it's easier for us to refer to them back, and we'll be more likely to answer it if we can. Gary, I always appreciate your contributions here. You felt it's easier to grow your endowment than people realize, and your team has to have the right mindset and make it happen. That's right. You have to have it as a lively and ongoing part of your development program, and you should, as far as I'm concerned, largely through conversations about planned giving, but occasionally donors will have a preference for endowment. Okay. So Lauren, hi, Lauren Renneker. Anyone have good ideas for a public phase during a pandemic? How do we get people excited about the campaign without gatherings and events? You want to start that, Amy? I have some thoughts on it if you don't want to start it.
No, I don't want to start it. I want you to start it.
You're passing the ball back to me, aren't you?
Yeah.
So here's, these days, I think I would think carefully about making use of these crowdsourced platforms for the public phase of your campaign. I think you need to think about we have remarkable tools of all kinds where we can get people to have online campaigns, and where we have thermometers and all sorts of things that are virtual. And I'm not sure which of them, would be appropriate for you. One of the things you can do in a public phase is you can have each of your key people have a little campaign of their own, and you can have competitions. You can do all kinds of things with online platforms and not rely so much on events and on big events. I think we just have to shy away from that. And in my experience, and I don't have a lot of it, most of these online events are disappointing in terms of the participation. I mean, which isn't to say people don't participate. They're just disappointing to sit there, and when you actually have to live through them, they're disappointing. Don't you find that, Amy?
Everybody has Zoom burnout, right?
Everybody has Zoom burnout, exactly.
Give them a really important reason to show up. But Lauren, I'd love to actually turn your question over to the chat box, to the gallery. So who's doing what for the public phase? How are you keeping people excited about the campaign without your in-person gatherings and events? So I would love to see what other people have to say, and we'll come back to that in a minute.
Be sure to chat to panelists and attendees if you haven't changed that.
Yes, excellent. All right. Miriam's asking, at what point in the campaign should you focus on an endowment, or should it be done in tandem with the rest of the campaign? And I think, go ahead.
I'm happy to take that on. When you're doing a capital campaign, or a capacity campaign. There was some question. But with the phrase we use really is capital campaign. And in my mind these days, that sort of includes any kind of capacity campaign. You're going to be talking to your largest donors. That's where the money is, right? You're going to be talking to them in all sorts of ways. If you do a feasibility study or a guided feasibility study, you'll be talking to them then. Once you start asking for gifts, you're going to be talking to them in serious ways personally. And you should, at that time, be asking them if they would consider including your organization in their wills. Is this something you'd be inclined to do? You can't do that unless your campaign has endowment as an objective, because you can't count a bequest or a bequest intention in your campaign plan if your campaign is only for building, right? If Amy puts what my organization in her will, she's 40 something years old, right? We're not presumably not going to bring in that money for a whole lot of years. It means I can't count that money towards my building needs. But if there's an endowment, I can count it. I can count it at a discounted value. So in my opinion, every campaign should have an endowment component to it, so that when you're talking to your largest donors, you can be saying, would you consider putting our organization in your will, or making a different kind of an endowment gift to the campaign? It's a natural time to be talking to people.
Okay. So Kristen, we got to put this issue to bed, but thank you for raising it, Kristen. So the question is, capital campaign versus capacity campaign. And honestly, the two are the same, right? It's a semantics issue. Now, capital campaign is the more frequently used vernacular. So capital campaign has come to mean everything. You can have a building that you're raising money for. You don't have to have a building you're raising money for. And the reality is that's a capacity campaign. For some reason, we call them capital campaigns. But honestly, capital campaign, capacity campaign, you're building capacity for your organization, whether or not you do it with the building.
Right. Yeah. If we could change the language, we would have everyone be talking about capacity campaigns. And then we would say, well, is there a building in your plans for a capacity campaign or not? Right. So, but that's not the way people use the language. So we're fighting against something that's just embedded in that.
Yes. We asked for some suggestions in the chat. So let's peek over at that. And so in response to the public phase, what are people doing? Virginia says we've been using the good old-fashioned airwaves, working with a local radio station in the area, doing an on-air interview, and then they share them through their social media pages. So a great example of how to do public. Good for you, Virginia.
Right. And then a whole series of email updates, right? So-and-so brought in such and such. We are within X number of dollars of our goal. Celebrate with us. If we get to our goal, we're going to send everybody an online banner. I mean, how many of you actually use an exercise app of some sort? And every time you have a personal best, you get a medal, right? Comes on your email, right? Or a shower of confetti or something. I mean, I always get a shower of confetti when I've done something I've never done before. You can do that for the public face of your campaign as well. Yeah. So I would look into that. I think there are all kinds of interesting things that you can do through radio waves, through television, through the internet, right? But think about it in a real way.
All right, so let's ask the group again. Barbara's asking, does your organization, I'm going to ask all of you on the line here, ever take a portion of their annual fund and move it over to your endowment? And I don't know what your accountant would say about that, but I'm curious what people do. So let us know, let Barbara know in the chat. And we'll read some of those answers out if we see them.
Yeah, what an interesting question, actually. That's a super interesting question. And I could imagine, I don't know that I know an organization like this, but I could imagine an organization that has as a policy, where the board has a policy that says for every dollar of annual fund, we put 10 cents of it in our quasi-endowment. However you want to say that is a sort of enforced attention to the long term.
Right. It's like your savings account, right?
I don't know why one couldn't do that.
And Gary, who is all things fundraising, says yes. And it's not unusual. And Aaron echoes that our board has. So I think, it is just deciding what the policy is. I think that's a smart way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and you can imagine the positive language that you can put around that. Say, our organization is committed to serving people long into the future. As a one way of doing that, we take 10 cents of every dollar donated and we put it into an investment fund that acts as endowment. I think that's a strong thing to do.
Yeah, we seem to be getting lots of examples of people that are doing that. So good.
So, all right, here, let's see, anonymous. I don't know if there's one person who's anonymous or more, but sometimes people don't want to be anonymous and they end up showing anonymous. What if you needed fundraising to help more people? Well, yes, indeed, you can consider capacity building. Remember this, however, that a capacity campaign, whether it's got a building in it or not, is like a springboard. Right. What motivates people to give significantly higher gifts to a special campaign is that the promise is that their money will make a significant difference to bump the organization up to a higher level. So you don't want to do a capacity campaign that is business as usual. Right? You want to frame your campaign so you can go back to your very same donors and ask them to invest a more significant amount of money pledged over a period of time that is going to really springboard your organization to the next level of operation. And it's those very same people that you will be asking to continue their regular annual fundraising. So that's the bounce, right? You need is something that motivates people's willingness to give, that is more than, well, this year we're going to serve 10 more people. It's got to say, here's the way we're going to invest so we can really make a difference in the way we serve our community. So it takes a courage to do that. But without that, it will fall flat.
Excellent. Andrea, I think that is a perfect stopping point. We need to do a 30-second commercial for our mini campaign program. So many of you have heard about our mini campaign program before. We ran it twice last year, and it is going to start up again on February 4th. We are only taking a maximum of 10 organizations and possibly just 8 for this cohort, between 8 and 10. Registration is open. And as a thank you for you guys showing up for Toolkit Talks every week in and week out, we have decided to offer you a special discount. I'm going to put in the chat box the link to our mini campaigns. It's just capitalcampaigntoolkit.com/mini campaign. Mini-campaign. I'm sorry. I need to be reading it out. capitalcampaigntoolkit.com/mini-campaign. And you can read all about it, but basically it's an 8-week boot camp to raise $100,000 or more. So that's sort of the challenge and the offer. And as I started to say, to thank you for being a loyal Toolkit Talks subscriber and attendee, we are offering a 10% discount for the next 48 hours just to get you to convince your boards to act quickly. The special code I've put in the chat box is TT for Toolkits Talks 10% discount. So if you sign up by Wednesday night, now if you're listening to the podcast and you want this discount after the date, send us an email and we'll make sure that you can get through for that discount. But anybody who's on this Toolkit Talk, you've got 48 hours till Wednesday night. Mary Jo's asking how often we hold these mini campaigns. Last year, we did it twice. I think the answer is we're not committed to when the next one is. We will probably do one again, maybe in June, maybe in September. But if you want to raise $100,000 or more in the next 8+ weeks, sign up for this February 4th cohort. Okay, that's my 30-second commercial.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Amy and I have done these together in the past, and they really are fascinating and fun and remarkably successful. I know we have a couple people on this session who raised a chunk of money through those. But I think it provides discipline. It gives you basic tools for actually knowing how to ask for money and having how to put the case together. It takes all the capital campaign principles and smushes them into 8 weeks, and it makes it very, very high intensity, and people come together every week as a group, so you get to know a whole bunch of people. It's fun. There were a couple of things to pick up from the chat, Amy, that I think are worth doing. Somebody said that they call their endowment a sustainability fund to avoid the confusion of endowment versus quasi or quasi-endowment. I think that's a good idea. Let's see.
Marvin, can we steal that for one of our blog posts or borrow it? I don't know if it's stealing. Thank you for sharing that. Email me if that's an issue, but I like sustainability fund.
And Yolanda has said, and this is really important, her board has approved a policy that says all estate gifts go into an endowment, or a sustainability fund, a quasi-endowment. That is, in my opinion, so important. And so many organizations don't have a policy like that. So that means that when money actually comes in from an endowment, it gets spent, right? Even though it's found money, no one was counting on it. And
not only that, it will never come again from that donor.
Right.
And so this is a one-time gift, and you shouldn't spend it on your annual fund. There should absolutely be a policy that planned gifts, especially bequests, go into that endowment. It's the number one way that you're going to build that endowment.
Yeah, Pam Montgomery call their fund the Forever Fund. I like that too. Sustainability fund, opportunity fund, board designated opportunity fund. So lots of creative names here. We should capture them all, Amy, and offer a list in a blog post. I think that's
I'm scribbling them down. So if you call your endowment fund anything else, if you have a great name for it, I would love to see it in the chat. All right, let's try and get to a few more of these questions. Kristen's asking an important question, one that we talk about all the time. Do we need to do a feasibility study to run a successful capital campaign? Andrea, I know you have some thoughts on feasibility.
I do. So it is, most things in this life are possible if you set your mind to doing them thoroughly enough. But that doesn't mean that they're advisable. So that's the question I'd put to you. Is it possible? Well, maybe. So here's the answer to your question, Kristen. If you can sit down after this call and make a list of the 15 people who are going to collectively give you at least 50 or 60 or 70% of your campaign goal, and you're pretty sure those people are involved enough, you have a high degree of confidence that that's possible, then you probably can get away without doing a feasibility study. But if that's not the case, if you can't off the top of your head make a list of those people, you probably should do a feasibility study. There are multiple versions of that. We at the Toolkit have a special version of feasibility study. We call it a guided feasibility study, and we work with clients to help them do the interviews themselves and then help them make sense of what they've heard and help prepare a report and give a report to their board. But we believe that leaders of organizations are best served if they have the conversations with their largest donors.
All right, let's put that in context of other options for feasibility studies. Yes. So actually at the toolkit, inside the Capital Campaign Toolkit, which is actually an online toolkit, in addition to all of our support services, we provide 3 options when it comes to feasibility studies, or 3 suggestions. If you think about them on like a spectrum, right? One would be the most traditional type of feasibility study, where an organization would hire an outside consultant, and the outside consultant would come and talk to your biggest prospective donors and community leaders and interview them and come up with a report and recommendations. So that's one end of the spectrum. All the way at the other end of the spectrum, you might have do-it-yourself conversations. And so we actually, inside the toolkit, provide some questions that you might go out and ask. Like Andrea said, if you can identify 15 people that you're reasonably confident would give your organization 50 or 60 or 70% of your campaign goal, you should have do-it-yourself conversations and go out and talk to them and make sure that they like the idea of your campaign and that they're pretty much on board. Right in the middle is what Andrea was talking about, a hybrid of those 2 models we call our guided feasibility study model. It's where you, leaders of the organization, go talk to your lead donors, but you work with one of our expert campaign advisors on selecting those that you'll go talk with, what to ask them, how to analyze the conversations, how to collate and compile the results that you heard, and make appropriate recommendations to your board, all with the guidance of an experienced advisor. Because most organizations don't want to wing their feasibility study. They want some more support than that. And so that's why we've created this guided feasibility study, because quite frankly, we think it's the best of both possible worlds, because it allows you to go out and build those relationships prior to asking for money. It's really critical that you do that prior to a campaign. So anyways, all right.
So a number of interesting things have come up in the Q&A. So our anonymous person, or one of our anonymous people, have said that the Better Business Bureau standards for charity, they didn't pass because they had such a big savings account, essentially. They didn't refer to it as an endowment, right? They had a couple of large donors who invested, put in a reserve for the future, and they got pinged for it. Right? Doesn't that drive you nuts? The ACLU has actually had that problem as well, that they have been pinged for it. And of course it's ridiculous. And I would have a conversation with the Better Business Bureau or with AFP to get them so that they understand the importance of having endowment. And maybe the problem is that you didn't call it endowment of some sort. But I don't know the answer, but I would sure be talking to those people and clarifying the importance of building for the future. That just makes my blood boil.
Or using it as an endowment, right? I mean, right. You're not using any of the interest, and I don't know what the rules are around it.
Yeah. So, Gary, I love what you've written here. I think this really is so important. I'm just going to read it. I don't think people have a chance to see. I don't know if you can see the questions. What do you think of this? In my many years of soliciting gifts to endowment, I rarely ask for an amount, rather engage the prospect in the discussion of their vision, the goal for what a gift would do. Once they are wedded to an objective, self-defined, getting to an ask amount, a self-defined objective, the ask amount was much easier. And Gary, you survived 2 campaigns totally for endowment. I know that's among the hardest of fundraising to do, so congratulations. But I do think that the key is finding out what the donor wants to do, right? That's always the key. It's finding out what the donor wants to do. It's so interesting how hard it is for us to remember that, isn't it? And Virginia, you want to know, is this a time to look at your current policy and see if you can adjust or modify it? These are policies regarding endowment, I presume, or how money is going to be spent, or whether you're going to borrow money. I think these are all good things to be bringing up to your board. And it's probably, if you can get someone on your board to champion the concept of actually doing some financial planning, looking carefully at all of these things and the policies around that, it's a really good idea to get that rolling.
All right. I have to read what Karen's written. When I worked for a faith-based organization, a donor referred to her bequest gift as an exit tithe, a gift that would sustain her annual giving even after death, even in death. I adopted that and my constituency loved it. I think that's absolutely beautiful, right? An exit tithe. I've got to write that down too. You wrote that down?
I wrote it down. Yes, I did. I did.
We shouldn't be scared about talking about bequests, although clearly so many of us are. I mean, it involves 2 scary topics, money and death. But the reality is, when people think about leaving a legacy, it's not such a terrible thing. And in this crazy day and age, I think we all need to be thinking about, what do we want our legacy to be?
Yeah, exactly. Sally has offered something important and interesting also. She has a capitalization plan. That's an interesting notion. Write that one down, Amy.
Yeah.
That includes a rainy day fund, includes an innovation fund. I love the idea of having an innovation fund, and something that will ultimately be a quasi-endowment once you've raised the other pots of money. So I love the idea. I particularly love the idea of an innovation fund. I think so many organizations are squeezed so tight financially that they can't take the risk on innovation. Right? Innovation is risky. You have to be willing to try things and let them fail. And in order to do that, you need a pot of money set aside specifically for that. So I love the idea of including an innovation fund in capacity building campaigns. That's where the best ideas come from. It makes an organization feel alive and future looking, particularly when we are in such a radically quickly changing environment with regard to technology, right? You should have an innovation fund to try things out and see what works and see what doesn't. We often do that with the toolkit.
We absolutely. But every nonprofit, I mean, honestly, so many of you are trying to solve some of the biggest challenges in the world that have never been solved before. You have to be innovative. Why wouldn't you have an innovative fund and an innovation fund? So absolutely. I think that is something that donors savvy donors would flock to. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. All right, listen, just back to our mini campaign. If you're interested but not sure or confused in any way, we are here to talk to you about it. We'd love to know it, help you decide if you're a good candidate for that program or not. So don't hesitate to give us a call or send us an email. Of course, I'm Amy at capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, and Andrea is Andrea at capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. You're always more than welcome to email either of us. We're here for you, and we would love to discuss your mini or your mega campaign or your endowment campaign. If you're considering an endowment campaign or a capacity campaign, of course, we would absolutely love speaking with you about that too. Andrea, any final thoughts for today?
So I'm just looking at Stephen's chat, Amy. I'm not sure.
I got your email. I'll get back to you.
All right, great. So, I just want to tell you how much it helps me personally to be on these calls, that you expand my thinking, our thinking. You sort of, it feels, I know the premise is that we are offering you information, but the reality is that every time you suggest things that we haven't thought about, it stimulates our thinking. So I want to thank you for being here with us week after week, and tell your friends where we can accommodate a lot of people on these calls. And so we're happy to have it continue. It is January. We've been doing these since March, and they continue to feel lively and useful to us, and I hope useful to you. So thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Bye. Get those vaccinations.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.